Good evening, good afternoon. Thank you for joining everybody. This is our second series of All Things Global powered by Vistatec with global economist David Rosenberg. Thank you everybody for joining today. I'm Suzanne Frank and I'll be your host.
I'm Laura Daly, I'll be your host.
And we're going to kick off right away having some questions for David Rosenberg, who is the president and chief economist of Rosenberg and Associates, Research and Associates, I should say. So David, our first out of the box kind of discussion that we'd like to have with you, could you tell us a little bit about your journey to getting involved with economics? How did that begin for you?
Oh boy. Well, you know what most people don't know is that when I was in high school in grade 11, I actually took economics. And on the very first day when I came home, my father said to me, so how was your first class of economics? I said, oh, well, Dad, it was really great. You know, we learned about the small open economy with no government. My father looked at me incredulously and said, did you say no government? He says, let me show you something, son. So he showed me his pay stub. And you see this 50% of my paycheck in this little corner? I go, yeah. He says, well, that's going to the government. He says, maybe you should think of taking something a little more practical. So I said, okay. And I actually dropped economics in high school.
Really?
And when I went to the University of Toronto, 1979, I actually went into the Bachelor of Commerce program. I wanted to become an accountant. And don't ask me why. And then by December 1979, halfway through the first year, I was doing well in everything, except the one subject that you actually need to become an accountant, which was financial accounting. And not only was I failing miserably, I had the worst grade in the class. And I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't get the T accounts for anybody that knows anything about accounting. And I remember going to Gary Lee, Professor Lee, who, back then they had the accountants do the tutorials and teaching. He was at Arthur Anderson, if you remember that firm. I said, Mr. Lee, what's wrong? What's going on with me? He says, Dave, he says, you just have problems balancing the T accounts. So I said, well, what do you advise your students who can't balance the books? He says, oh, I tell them to go in economics. So I went into economics, and the reality is that it combines so much. It combines, well, obviously, economics is a study of behavior, so sociology, psychology, math, statistics. You have to know how to write and communicate, and of course, my favorite subject was history. And you cannot be an effective economist without knowing history and what's different and what's the same. And so it just combined everything that I loved. It just became a passion. So all those inputs, I think, just matched my DNA. And so jack of all trades, master of none. But that's really how I fell into it at the university level. And then, everything just took off from there. But, if you enjoy doing social research that combines finance and sociology and psychology, and you like to write, because you have to be able to communicate your ideas to really be effective. I guess I would say that in almost any field. And that's basically, it's not, I got to tell you, it's not that I found economics. It found me.
Interesting, very interesting. So I see you all over the talk circuit these days. There's a lot of kerfuffle around your ideas, around economic thoughts. And I guess the most interesting thing that really kind of captured me when I discovered you was I was listening to one of your podcasts on the homebody economy. Mm-hmm. And particularly in this kind of new normal that we're all living in with COVID, Can you talk a little bit about what led you to coin the phrase the homebody economy, and kind of what was your thinking on that when you kind of came up with that? Because there's been a lot of promotion around that.
Right. Well, I guess you always have to have in this business some colloquial term so that people will remember it. And so I just personalized it because during this pandemic and in the lead up to the lockdown and during the lockdown, and then of course just the notion that getting into crowds as a risk of a certain medical outcome for yourself, it got me thinking about how are people spending their time. And so look, uh, I became a homebody in the sense that uh, during this period that we've all been confined to varying degrees. I mean, it's not everybody, but it's become a significant portion of the population that we are spending more time cocooning. Uh, and one of the, I guess you could say, silver linings of the pandemic is that we become a lot more self-reliant. And I feel sorry for the restaurants. I love to eat out. I love to go to the bars. I'm also a social animal. Um, but we've learned to do a lot of things on our own, and it shows through the data. So when I talked about the homebody economy, well, look at all of us right now. I mean, we're all basically doing this, on a Zoom call, from our homes. We've changed. The vast majority of people have changed their home into an office and wired their home into an office. Uh, you're taking a look right now at a massive secular shift taking place from multifamily housing to single family housing, from the inner city to the suburban areas, because the one thing that we have developed an appreciation of, especially for families that are cooped up or were cooped up on the 30th floor of an apartment building with no balcony. Imagine how horrible that must have been. So all of a sudden, people are thinking, wow, how did we actually get into a home building boom in the context of a pandemic? Well, because there's a shift in preferences from condos and apartments towards the bungalow in the burbs with a backyard. You see, I also love alliterations. But on top of that, I was noticing in the data things that were happening that are still happening. Because you get this rich data sources every month. You get the retail sales numbers, you get the consumer spending numbers. People always say, well, what does it mean for GDP? What does it mean? What's the Fed going to do on these numbers? But you can get so granular looking at the data, and I love going into the weeds and getting my hands dirty. It's a passion of mine to go in to look at what are the trends beneath the trends. What's the story beneath the story? So all of a sudden, in the context of an environment where we're actually saving a lot of money, we're not traveling, we're not going to the theme parks, we're not going to the movie theaters, and so when people talk about, well, we've had a lot of government stimulus, yes, that much is true, a lot of government stimulus, but we've also redirected our expenditures in some sense because we're saving so much money from not doing things, in those parts of the economy we're actually hurting, like restaurants, because we're not going out to restaurants. But I was noticing stuff that was flying off the shelves. Of course, flying off the shelves, we're all ordering it on Amazon. But cookbooks and bread makers, kitchen appliances. So we become a nation of cooks all of a sudden. So I don't even know. Look, I imagine that we will at some point get out and go out and have a great meal at a restaurant. We'll all do that. But I reckon that we'll be doing that a lot less. Okay. Because we all learned how to make lasagna in our own kitchen. And so, so a lot of that, we become homebodies, but we become, you see, again, looking at the silver lining in this dark cloud, we become a lot more self-reliant. I'm noticing, for example, so I mentioned bread makers, I mentioned kitchen appliances, sewing machines,
Right.
clothing repair, upholstery repair, uh, off the charts. So all of a sudden, we're saving money from not going to the laundromat because we don't have to go to the office and with our pressed shirts. But we're spending money doing other things, and so we're doing a lot of repair. I'll tell you that as much as we're talking about how, for example, auto sales have been very strong. Why is that? Is because now we're vacationing by vehicle as opposed to by airplane for most people. So auto sales have done well. But before the auto sales picked up, even during the period when we had the lockdown phase, auto parts were booming. And so people were learning, I guess, how to change their own oil. And take a look what's happening, for example, home renovation, remodeling, and not just indoors, but also outdoors in a budding bull market. So you see, when I say the homebody economy, it's because the home has become so many other things coming out of this pandemic. Another thing, for example, I would just say that was been booming is gardening supplies. Have you noticed that gardening supplies? And this happened in the aftermath of World War II. Do you remember what they called them? Victory gardens, but also a big concern over the security of food supply in the future. And I can tell you, it's in the data, but I also know tons of people that all of a sudden coming out of the pandemic have developed a green thumb.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this stuff, pet services, and this is actually very interesting. There's a reference in the Fed's beige book 2 weeks ago from the San Fran Fed on the surge in pet buying, pet services, because of course, for a lot of people who are on their own, what a great companion than to have, say, a dog or a cat. That's in the data. That's actually booming. So there's a lot of trends that didn't exist before the COVID. There's stuff that's in a clear downtrend. We know what those are in the entertainment, leisure, travel, tourism. But there's other areas that actually, maybe in a perverse way, have benefited. And it's all related to living and working in the home.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And I know Laura's going to ask a question, and I'm sorry, Laura, I'm going to do an unscheduled follow-up.
Oh, sure.
If I may.
Yeah.
David, one thing that I'm curious about is you had mentioned the restaurants and how we're all learning to cook, even myself, which is shocking. But one thing I learned from the cooking is it saves me so much money. So now with this lesson, my question for you is, do you think consumers are seeing that so much of what we're doing on our own and our self-sufficiency is being easy on our pocketbook, that we may not go back in full force the way we were before to those things?
Yeah, 100%. And, I've been writing about this, that, look, I'll make no mistake. I mean, the airlines are hurting, the restaurants are hurting, tourism, a lot of things in the consumer service industry. And so whether it's by fiat, look what's happening in Europe right now, where we're back to at least partial lockdowns. I'm not saying we're going back into lockdowns in the United States. What I will say is this much. Everybody talks about the third quarter. We had a 33% increase in GDP at an annual rate. Of course, that became a very big slogan for the Republicans in the lead up to the election. And it came off a minus 31% in the second quarter detonation. Of course, that was the lockdowns. But before the second quarter, we had the first quarter. And first quarter GDP was negative 5%. And consumer spending in the first quarter, consumer spending was negative 6% at an annual rate. Tell you, consumer spending in the first quarter was weaker, or as weak as anything we saw in the Great Recession of 08 and 09. And that was before the lockdowns, because people naturally became nervous with the pandemic and started to pull back on their own consumption patterns before they were told to by the government. So I think you're 100% right. A lot of these changes going forward are more permanent, and I don't think are temporary. These are true secular changes. When you look at the data, it's startling. You're right. We saved, actually, the numbers are incredible, that since February, when the pandemic really started to hit, as a country, we've actually saved, in quotes, saved $700 billion.
Wow.
From domestic services. That's in consumer spending. Well, that's, that could be your nanny. It could be your housekeeper. Way down. Your travel budget, way down. Restaurants, way down. Every form of travel is way down. You're not spending money at the movies. Okay, well, you're watching Netflix instead. But, the reality is that you're right, that is unleashed, in a perverse way, somebody's loss is somebody's gain. We have taken a lot of that money from the restaurants and bought cooking appliances and ancillaries as a substitute. We've gone from eating from going to the movies and entertainment, towards Netflix, as an example.
Mhm.
And we've gone from spending money on travel towards remodeling the house and rewiring the house to become your home office. So yeah, there's been powerful. I guess it's maybe wrong, maybe insensitive to call it stimulus. It's just coming out of spending you would have done somewhere else. But you see, there's going to be some other longer term consequences here, because let's take a look, for example, what's been hurting really badly? Gym memberships, right? But people still want to exercise. What do? They buy these Peloton bikes. I don't know about you. I didn't know what a Peloton bike was before the pandemic. I knew what Zoom was. I just never used it. Now I use it every day.
Mhm.
But you buy a Peloton, but you see your gym membership, you're paying it every year. You're going 3, 4, 5 times to the gym, or you're paying your trainer. You're going to the gym all the time. That's a recurring source of economic activity. You buy a Peloton bike, that's it. You're buying a bike, that's it. Now people are going to be vacationing in their backyard. That's the new future. But you go on trips all the time with your family if you can. You go on trips. It's a recurring source of economic activity in the services industry. But you only remodel your backyard once, right? And then it's done. So there's a lot of the spending we're talking about in the consumer durable goods industry, let's call it. That's very good news for them, but it's basically one and done. Whereas the services industry is a lot more perpetual. And that's what's really going to be changing. The dynamics of the economy are going to be changing as a result, because a lot of the spending that we've done to remodel the house, so on and so forth, or to move out of your condo to a single family home in the suburbs. I mean, you do that once in a 10 or 20 or maybe even 30 years. So in terms of what it means for economic mobility, vitality, there's going to be a lot of changes in the future coming out of this as well.
Very interesting where it affects some and less others. So the dynamic is interesting. Like, okay, durable goods are doing well, but services industry are more perpetual. So go ahead,
Yes.
Laura. Thank
Yes,
you.
and along those lines, I'm very curious about your ideas around what does this look like in global markets? Do you anticipate any trends in particular emerging markets or changing emerging markets because of all this? Who's in general categories or in specific categories? How are different markets going to behave, do you think?
Well, I mean, we're talking about different markets. And even when you talk about emerging markets, it's like talking about, people will ask me, what's your view on healthcare? Well, it's not a homogeneous market. And emerging markets are not a homogeneous market. What I'll say is this, broadly speaking, I mean, emerging markets, I mean, I can't really talk about Chile and Peru and Venezuela as emerging markets the same way I would talk about, Taiwan and Singapore and China. I am actually very bullish on Asia, Southeast Asia, and that includes China. It's very controversial. Everybody's very angry at China. Everybody would like to put China in some sort of penalty box, but you're not going to, cut your nose off to spite your face. That genie has been out of the bottle for 20 years.
Mhm.
These other parts, you see, this is the reality. And I'm not going to comment on my views on society. We have a type of society that puts great value on liberty and freedom, individual freedoms. And we are going to be living, until there's a vaccine or some therapeutic, we're going to be living in North America and in the Western world with the pandemic a lot longer than they will in Asia, where the populations are more subservient. They will listen and they will stay locked down. And in China, they have a totalitarian regime where you lock down or else. But what do they have in China? They have 120 cases. They've
Mhm.
the irony of the ironies is that the country that was at the epicenter of the pandemic is one that emerged the first. they're going to be the only country in the world. China will be the only country in the world, whether you like it or not. And I say this to people and they block their ears. They don't want to hear it, but you have to hear it. Chinese economy is going to be about the only economy in the world that's going to have positive growth this year in the context of a global pandemic. And the IMF is saying that their economy is going to accelerate to over 8% growth next year. People say to me, how is that possible in China? Because we know from the one-child policy that their demographics are starting to look a little like Japan. You take a look at the productivity. See, there's two sources of growth on the supply side in the economy. Well, there's really three. There's labor, and there's capital, and there's land. Well, land is fixed. Labor is a negative in most parts of the world at the aging demographics. But capital is all about productivity. And 100% of Chinese growth is in productivity. They have the fastest productivity in the world. They have the best infrastructure in the world. In America, we talk about an infrastructure package. We need infrastructure stimulus. We keep hearing that over and over again. And it's more almost of a political gimmick than it is something that's real. China's got the best infrastructure, transportation, communication, and they're the leader in 5G. And they did not blow their brains out on fiscal stimulus because they didn't have to. They beat the pandemic early. They didn't actually blow their brains out on monetary policy. They're actually one of the only countries in the world where their interest rate is not only positive, it's more than 3%. So if they had to actually stimulate monetary policy, they could do it. So I would say, and of course, you're talking about other countries, whether it's Korea, Thailand, Taiwan. I'd say that Asia, to me, has already been a growth leader for a long time. That's not something new, but that's going to accelerate. And I think that China, and it's going to be very interesting from a geopolitical standpoint, because when you look at the numbers and you look at the forecast, you'll see that in the next 10 years, China will supplant the United States as the largest GDP on the planet. And the US has not seen its economic hegemony sacrificed since 1871. This is going to be something new for all of us. Anybody who's been born in the past 100 years or more has not seen America challenged this much from an economic standpoint. This will create all sorts of angst and anxiety, and I don't really know how China can actually ever be, this can't be reversed. How it gets contained remains to be seen. But I'd say that, that when you're taking a look, especially in the savings rates in these countries, they're very high. If you're really going to be making a call on the consumer globally, I think it's what I wrote this today. Once again, you got to attach something that people remember. My report today said, "Go East, young man and woman." So I'd say that's where the growth is going to be. They've licked the pandemic. They've got much stronger balance sheets. Yes, it's true. They have much stronger balance sheets even in China. They've got tremendous productivity growth.
And what about consumer behavior? Are they in the same categories as here in gardening? And what's your take on that? What kind of categories do you see growth in those particular markets?
Well, no, I think that if you're, I think you're going to find that there's going to be a lot more in the way of more cyclical spending, and not really the homebody economy is for those economies, mostly in the Western world.
Right.
Where we still live with the fear of the pandemic, or you have these recurring lockdowns. And I'm not saying the US will go into lockdown mode again. That politically could be suicide to do. But I said the point I made about the first quarter was that even before the lockdowns, people became nervous and they became homebodies before the lockdown. In Asia, I think you're going to find, because the homebody economy is really, an economy that, where people are a little more defensive in nature. We're basically buying things that we need, not necessarily what we want.
Yeah.
And so, and a lot of, I mean, a lot of what we want isn't even available. I mean, you know, in a lot of cities, you can't even go to an NFL game. But I think in Asia, you can go to a lot of sporting events. In Asia, restaurants aren't closed down, bars aren't closed down. So I think that if you're looking for something less defensive uh, from the consumer, something more broadly based vitality that is also more cyclical, that's where you're going to want to go. You're going to want to basically, like, I don't know so much about, I mean, if you're going to buy the airlines in the United States, you're making a bet on, is a vaccine coming soon? Or you're making a bet, is the government going to give a bailout to the airline industry? If you're buying, say, any airline in Asia, you're not making that decision, okay? Because they've licked the pandemic. So I think that if you're a global investor or you're a global business and you're looking as to where the toehold is for something much more broadly based from a consumer standpoint, something that is beyond the home body, Asia is going to be a very good place to be.
Thank you, David. I know we have a lot of people in our VIP audience here who have questions, and I know that they're going to start with their name and the company that they represent, and they might even use the hand gestures that we learned in our last session last month. I have Sasha here next, and then Nicole.
Did I do the hand gesture right?
Yes, very good. My professor taught me.
David, absolutely a pleasure. Just such great insight, and thank you for being with us today. Just because so many of us are stewards of brands, can you give us some examples of the organizations that have navigated this effectively, whether that's in the home appliances sector or in other factors? You brought out auto parts. I don't know, some of the examples that might have come from your research where organizations have stepped up and navigated this effectively.
Right. Well, look, I touched on this, I think, at the beginning, but I think that we really have to emphasize with exclamation marks, you know, how the world has changed in the past 6 months. So what we know is that social distancing is now the rule. Working from home is now encouraged when possible. The movie theaters are half empty, you know, and attending school now means opening up a laptop at home for a lot of students. So, you know, what I'm thinking about when you're talking about brands, it's what we talked about earlier. It's basically, you know, companies that can bring us a taste of our previous lives, you know, like Zoom. Look at Zoom. Zoom has gone from a business-centric obscurity to a widespread adoption of a work-home reality. So we have that. I mentioned Peloton before. It's a company I never heard of previously. It's basically replaced gym memberships by offering people stationary bikes at home. And then, you have shares of tech titans, you have Apple, you have Microsoft, you have Amazon, you have Alphabet. Why have they all done well this year is because these companies have actually benefited from the pandemic. Now, we can talk about, the degree of concentration there is in the stock market. We can talk about, their valuation levels, which are very extreme. But I think that the point is that when we're taking a look at these particular companies, they cater to this period of working from home as being a much more dominant force. So I would say that, when you're talking about brands, I would say that, look, anything that caters to the home body economy, in whether it's in food products, and you've seen a lot of the brand names, cleaning supplies, for example, just take a look at, I don't know what people are taking Clorox for. Hopefully it's for the right reason. But their sales, we just got their numbers the other day, went through the roof. But I'd say that, food products have been a really a big winner here since we're eating at home more. And I think that you've seen a big shift as well towards comfort food. So, I'm not going to get into specific names. You can imagine, who those would be. But I'd say that
Macaroni and cheese.
exactly, or peanut butter or cookies. Look, a lot of the stuff I'm telling you, when you're taking a look at how much food, especially we bought enough food for the next 3 years. And of course, part of that was because people thought this might be the Black Plague and we're going to stock up as if it's a war. Look, the one thing that the president said, well, we don't know which president yet, but President Trump said we're fighting an invisible enemy, and 100% true. But I'd say, look, the implications, more broadly speaking, for internet infrastructure, computer hardware, video conferencing, like we're doing now. We're talking about brands. I'd say that in technology, the one thing I've been telling, my clients is that these stocks, quite right, have become extremely expensive. But there's areas in mid cap and small cap that have been largely ignored that that you can look at. I was saying before, when we talk about the consumer, we still have in the U.S. we have a 14% savings rate. Now, look, it got as high as 33%. The government stuffed everybody's wallets with cash to offset the income loss from the employment decline that we had. And we had the savings rate go up to 33% in the second quarter because there was nowhere to really spend that, outside of delivery services. But the savings rate's gone down to 14%, but it might level off there. Historically, the U.S. personal savings rate was around 7%. It's double that right now, and that might be the new steady state. So what I've been saying is we're into an era, I think, of elevated personal savings rates. Look, it can't be lost on anybody that we went into this situation, and this was really striking, where over half of the households in the country did not have enough savings. They did not have enough cash on hand to get through 3 months of idle activity. That's incredible, especially when you consider that we came into this with a 3.5% unemployment rate, the lowest in 50 years. We didn't have enough savings. Savings is now going to be a lot more sacrosanct. And it means spending is going to be a lot more selective than it's been in the past. But again, when we're talking about which brands, it's really think about what it is that we need. I'm thinking consumer staples. I am thinking healthcare. I'm thinking anything related to e-commerce, cloud services. I said before, I'll emphasize that wiring up your home to become your new office. These are all in budding new secular growth phases. Brand names, think of the brand names. Delivery services, well, they become an essential here. A budding bull market right there for who? Well, for Amazon, which is so obvious, but I would say any business model that copies it. So you tack on grocery chains. Grocery chains with what? Grocery chains with online services come out of this a big winner. So the shifting behavior that is already telling me, it's already taking place, tells me that you want to be involved in areas of technology, consumer staples, which largely includes food products. And there's other areas of the market too. I'd say healthcare. I mentioned big tech. They become essentials. And that's what I'm talking about within the context of North America. So I'm not talking about in the context of Asia, where I think it will be a lot more cyclical in nature. I think you can buy travel and tourism and outdoor recreational companies in Asia. But I'm talking about in the confines of North America, you want to focus on the brand name retail companies, consumer companies that cater to essentials. Essentials. Focus on what we need, not what we want. So I would say Microsoft in that respect. I'd say Microsoft has become a utility, and it's been re-rated in its equity price to become a utility. I think one could easily argue that Amazon has become a utility. I think you could argue that Google has become a utility. And it's also apparent to me that you want to also be focused on healthcare. Because as an economist, you're always looking at areas of the economy over the years that were overinvested or underinvested. We all knew we were massively overinvested in technology in 2000, massively overinvested in residential real estate back in 2006, 2007. And it seems very clear to me that healthcare has become a very underinvested area that I still think is going to become less regulated over time, and something as well that when looking at brand names, that's an area you want to focus on as well.
Thank you so much.
Somebody jump in with your question. I know you have one. State your name. Hey, Pedro, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Gonna have to jump in there, Priscilla.
Yes. David, great presentation. My name is Pedro Gomez. I'm with Microsoft, one of the companies that you mentioned. I wanted to pick your brains on automation and artificial intelligence. Where are the cusp of a big secular change where machines and robots and routines actually are close to becoming more intelligent and more productive than humans? So I wanted to hear what you have to say about that, both at the macro level. What does this mean for the economy overall? And at the micro level, what does this mean for individual workers?
Well, look, this is a trend that is going to really accelerate, and it already was accelerating. And this is a product of the automation, and we were talking about robots that were beyond just areas of manufacturing automobiles and other products, but also in services and in retail services and in medical care, and gaining a lot of momentum. A lot of this is obviously cost saving. You have a robot. The robot works 24/7. The robot doesn't take lunch breaks, doesn't take holidays, doesn't talk back to your boss. And increasingly, these robots, the robot technology has been doing a lot more tasks. I mean, to the point where people ask me, do you ever think a robot will do what you do? And I say, probably, but they won't have the same sense of humor, but they'll probably be able to do what I do. So the answer to the question is that this sort of technology is going to accelerate, and a lot of it is out of pure necessity. And this, again, is just human ingenuity realizing that population growth in most parts of the world, labor force growth is on decline. In Europe, now in China, in America, the only few countries in the world we're not seeing, courtesy of the aging baby boomers, a rapid decline in the skilled labor force. And so we are needing to engage in this shift in what economists would call the capital labor ratio. Labor is going down, capital is going up, and what's happening as a subplant to the labor going down is robotic technology as a response to that. And that's going to accelerate because the pandemic is going to accelerate that, and I'll tell you why. Because what's happening from a structural standpoint is that people are leaving the labor force. People are leaving the labor force. Either they want to or they're being pushed into it. Because let's face it, we lost 20 million jobs in the peak of the pandemic crisis in the spring and early summer. We've made up for a part of that, but we're still 10 million jobs, 11 million jobs in the hole in the United States, as an example. And what I'm noticing in the data is that people are leaving the labor force. That's a real structural growth problem. But companies still need that input in their production process. So I think that in terms of offsets to labor, insofar as what that means for AI, what it means for other forms of technology that are labor saving, absolutely necessary, because not only do we have a declining working age population from aging demographics, but it's being compounded by the pandemic's effect by having people actually willfully leave the labor market. So this trend is going to accelerate in the coming years, more than it already has over the course of the past 5 or 10.
It seems like it's advanced. I'm hearing 20 plus years of where we would have, we've had to jump 20 years ahead of time because of that. So very interesting question. Thank you, Pedro. So we want to get everybody in. So we're going to try, David, if we may, to keep maybe the answers to about 3 minutes. They're also interesting. We want to go a lot of places with this. We could do this for hours, but we are down to about the 20-minute mark. So with that said, who has a question?
I have a question. We are always looking, oh, sorry, Priscilla Noble, I'm with Adobe. So we are in that tech sector, and I would say doing fairly well in this, but I'm looking at a question sort of larger in a global brand sense. I'm always looking at trends, and at the end of last year, pre-pandemic, Euromonitor International had come out with sort of trends of 2020 that they were looking at, and saying that one of the things they said was proudly local, going global. In that a lot of countries, even ourselves, we tend to want to buy, things made by people locally or food, et cetera. And that they were starting to see this happen not only in North America, but in other countries around the world. And that multinationals, whether it be physical brands, manufacturing, or as I took it, tech as well, because we look at trying to culturalize our products to some degree, would be expected to respond appropriately. And begin to tailor their products perhaps more locally around the world. I think my question is, in light of the pandemic, in light of the lockdown, in light of people being this global homebody, do you see this trend? Do you think that was possibly true going into 2020? And B, do you see any changes in this, whether it accelerated or it pulled back?
Right. Well, I would say that firstly, I think that we have to think about this post-pandemic world of being a world where we're going to have reduced globalization. I think that's a natural outcome. I think actually that we started seeing a lot of this with the trade wars of the past few years. But I'd say a world of reduced globalization. And I would agree with you that we are going to have more localized supply chains. That was one area where I think that Donald Trump and Joe Biden agreed on. In fact, they were stepping over themselves to talk about, did the trade balance with China improve or not improve? Did Donald Trump manage to bring manufacturing jobs home or not? I mean, a lot of that depends on when you start what your original time is on those arguments. But you can see in the debates, it wasn't like it was with Hillary Clinton, where she had actually just wrote a book on the benefits of free trade. Oops, didn't actually make a lot of friends in the Midwest. But when Joe Biden says we have actually a Buy America, I mean, you have one president saying "Make America Great Again," and you have another one saying "Buy America." What does "Buy America" mean? Buy America means I'm not going to buy from our neighbors, whether it's in Canada or whether it's in Asia or whether it's in Europe. We're going to do this at home. We're going to localize supply chains. So I think that is basically going to be an accelerating trend, but not just in the United States, but everywhere. So that's going to be a major transformation. And I think it's going to be first and foremost in the areas that we need. Again, need, not want. So semiconductors, medical supplies, and food security are going to be the main areas where there's going to be a lot more of that self-reliance country by country globally. So yes, 100% true that coming out of this, more protectionism, more populism, I would say more isolationism is coming out of this in the future. All these trends are going to gain more momentum globally.
Thank you, David.
Sorry, Suzanne, just one quick follow-up on that. For major brands then, do you see them who have been selling worldwide, do you see them then trying to become or position themselves more as a local brand in order to meet that sort of more local view, so that we still do sell internationally to some degree, but more focused on individual countries and needs there?
Right. And, I think that, you want to focus on companies that are domestic. They will be incentivized to produce domestically. It's not like new companies are going to be coming to the fore. These companies already exist, but they will be basically subsidized, for example, to not produce what they're producing, and in some sectors, not everywhere, to produce it at home and not abroad. So they'll relocate their production facilities, or they'll be given subsidies to sell into the home market as opposed to the foreign market. So that's how that's going to play out.
Thank you so much. Tim?
Hi, yeah, David, thanks a lot for all this. I've got a clarification question on.
Speak up a little bit, Tim. I'm sorry.
Thanks for all this, David. I've got a clarification question around some of the data around the homebody economy.
Yeah.
In general, on this redirection of spend, it sounds like Asia's a bit of an outlier, but could you compare the US data to European data? Do they look similar? Is it, right equal, or is it considerably different, or kind of in the middle? Thank you.
Well, look, it's hard to compare because every country did their own form of stimulus. Like, it's impossible to compare anything to the UK, because in the UK, the government there basically paid people to go out and eat. They defray the UK government, for a period of time. If you took a look at the restaurant numbers in the UK, you'd be thinking there's a restaurant boom there, because the government said they're going to pay whatever was 25 or 50% of every restaurant bill. We are going to pick up the tab for you. Well, that's over, basically. So it's hard to compare. A lot of it has to do with the pandemic. And there was a period of time there where Germany, I think, was just hit yesterday a new high for coronavirus cases. 3 months ago, they were the poster child. So you see, it's like a sine wave. It's a roller coaster. Right now, I would say that they're going to a 4-week lockdown. So I would say that, and you're already starting to see, we just got initial data, for example, in auto sales in Europe. They have fallen through the floor. And so you're going to find that a lot of it is like, just follow the virus. And I'd say that in the US right now, the case count is obviously, I think, at its highest level, certainly since early August. I'm going to expect, and I'm seeing it in the high frequency data, and you're starting to see it in the open table reservations, and we're starting to see it in the ATA data on air traffic, starting to see it in revenue per room in the hotel industry. I'd say in mid-October, things really started to cool off. I know people they say, oh, look at how great those retail sales numbers were. Yeah, okay. You're looking in the rearview mirror. The most up-to-date data in November are showing there's been a real decisive rolling over of consumer activity in the US. Why? Well, because of the pandemic. What else really happened? I mean, it's true that we're all sitting on our hands and pins and needles. Are we going to get another stimulus package? Well, the stimulus package is basically an insurance policy, because, like I said before, there's still a lot of money sitting in people's pockets from the previous stimulus. But I'd say that it's difficult to compare right now. But I'd say that the situation, given that there's a lockdown in Europe, consumer spending is going to detonate over the course of the next month. And then the question is going to be, was 4 weeks enough? Take a look at Israel as a template. Again, they were a poster child. They got their numbers down. They reopened too early, and then they had a lockdown for a couple of months. And so I'd say that it's, when you're talking about comparing intertemporally, it's very difficult, because it all depends on what's happening with the virus. And the US is not going to lock down again like they did in Europe right now. But I'm going to say that looking at the numbers right now, people are getting more nervous, and we haven't even headed to the winter yet, where we know the numbers are going to get a lot worse. Mm-hmm. So, and I'd say on top of that, I know I'm taking a long time to answer this question, but look, if we get an effective vaccine or therapeutic, that's a huge game changer. But I don't know when that's going to be. I'm not going to pretend that I know when that's going to be. But until then, and especially if we don't get another round of stimulus in the US in the next year, you can expect that the consumer is going to be extremely weak. I'll make this point. Without the lagged impact of the fiscal stimulus, I mean, that was a gift that kept on giving. You have to understand, it was the biggest fiscal stimulus of all time. Biggest government transfer of income to the household sector of all time. And that carried through into the third quarter. If we didn't have that money, and whether or not you're the world's most ardent libertarian, without the stimulus, the lagged impact into the consumer, in the third quarter, GDP would have been minus 6%, not plus 33. And if I was a Democrat on the hustings, I would have made that point. That's how important the stimulus is right now. It's actually organically, the economy is actually still in recession in the United States.
You're absolutely right. The exit polls are showing that people weren't as concerned about the coronavirus as was some of the candidates were thinking. Joe Biden in particular, it was more the economy. So you're absolutely correct on that. Do we have somebody else that has a question? Pascal.
Hi, this is Pascal from The Gap. Thank you for this presentation. It's insightful. In terms of retail, and when we look at the homebody economy, what do you see short-term and long-term? Because our supply chains are global. We manufacture clothes in Asia, and then we sell it around the world. So, and when you look at this trend of homebody economy, clothing, besides for children that are constantly growing and you need to replenish their wardrobe all the time, what do you think is the trend there? Because, you know, being at The Gap, we're global and we produce at a global scale, but for most retailers, it's the same. They're in the same position as well.
Well, so you're asking specifically about children's clothing?
No, just clothing and retails in general, because they don't fit in that essential necessarily category. You don't need as much clothes, or you don't need toys, and I'm just curious.
Well, look,
Just to add, she was just curious overall. She used the children as an example of a continuous opportunity for retail sales, but as far as overall picture for trending in retail, where do you see that going?
Look, as a perfect example, toys, hobbies, games. I mean, you couldn't buy enough Monopoly games as an example. So toys and games, those sales, and I see the data every month, surging in the lead up to the pandemic, during and after. Anything related to home entertainment or electronics, surging. But clothing, no.
Can I add a caveat to that, David?
Yeah.
What about in Pascal's case, and say athleisure wear in general? Because I know the Gap brand also encompasses brands like Athleta. We also have Nike, brands that are appealing to yoga clothing and homebody lifestyle. Would that be a difference?
I don't expect that. I don't expect that I could build a bullish case from the homebody economy theme on attire, even related to yoga or going on your Peloton bike. The reality is that people who can afford to buy nice clothing buy the nice clothing because of appearance, and appearances are important. Well, if you're not going to be going to the gym, who are you going to be impressing? So I don't know so much that people are going to be dying to go buy more Lululemon, for example, attire, or the upper end fancy attire. There's no need to, because you only buy it to impress people. And because fashion is all about appearance. In terms of kids, well, the kids are going back to school. So if you're going to say to me about kids apparel, I don't see there's a big negative impact there. But for mom and pa, who are going to be staying home, why are they going to be buying new clothes? Why would they buy new clothes? Why would you buy a new suit? A significant portion of the population. Now, make no mistake, I think that if we ever go back to there, if you want to talk about what is a pre-COVID norm, whatever normal is, yeah, maybe if I went back to the office, maybe I'll buy a new suit. You might argue actually that so much of us have put on so much weight because we became such good cooks and we didn't buy enough Peloton bikes that we probably do. Now, seriously, there's a lot of people, you're taking a look, people are wearing sweatpants and whatever because they can't get into their jeans. That's true. But that's a level shift. So you might go buy a few pairs of jeans, but I'm saying in general, there's going to be a much higher percentage of the population working from home where you don't have to get dressed up. The fact that we can't go into crowds means you can't go into restaurants. A lot of restaurants, you want to be dressed up. I'm not talking about going to, some drive-through or going to a fast food restaurant. I think clothing is going to have the longest stretch to recover. It's going to be very difficult.
I think Pascal and Al, I think we need some cool shirts for Zoom calls that say, funny things. We have time for one more question, guys. We're almost to the bottom. We could stay here forever. Who's next? Who's the last question? Al? Anyone? Pedro? Melissa? Suzanne?
I have a question. I'll ask it since you didn't. So we're sitting here with a bunch of global brands, and they want to know how they're going to survive. And they have employees and merchandise and technology and goods and services manufactured all over the world, and they're looking at entry point markets. You mentioned Asia. Any other advice for what markets to enter into if you're one of the lucky groups that you spoke about earlier, consumer staples, big tech, anything in that regard? Maybe you'd mentioned, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the, I'm so sorry. It's a technological term, huh?
Oh, Peloton, and also you had mentioned
just
energy
any of these. Yeah. Exactly. There was one, I think it was mentioning, there's a term for it. I'm sorry. It's, anyways, I can't think of it, but you know where I'm going with this. What would you recommend? What advice would you give to this group in that regards?
Well, look, I think I said before that, as it pertains to our world in this, I think Asia is going to have a much more vibrant consumer and much more broadly based. I think that if we're talking about, what the fundamental change is going to be, I said before, think about a world where we went into over half the households didn't have enough savings. It's going to be higher savings. There's going to be, therefore, a lower pool of consumer spending than what we've been accustomed to in the past 20 or 30 years. We also have to think about what's the world going to look like? How are these deficits and debts going to be paid? If they're not paid by higher taxes, how will they get paid? We either are going to have a world where taxes have to go up or a world where these debts have to get monetized, which means much higher inflation. And so that might be good news for pricing power if we get higher inflation, but it also means that your costs are going to go up. So it's not clear that it's a win-win for everybody. The point I'll make this, marketing obviously is extremely important. That's just a glib remark. But I'd say that you have to bolster your, whatever you do, however good you think you are, your online service footprint has to be a continued priority. A continued priority as to how you're going to be selling to a consumer environment that is less mobile than it was previously. So that's what I would say. That's what I would say. There's a lot of, whether it's mall real estate or almost any real estate outside of single family housing, people are going to be shopping online more and more.
Yeah.
And I think that is really the trend that you want to focus on, and then how you advertise. So I'd say that that's really what's going to be dominating. I think when I think of retail, I think of my own business, and I'm not in retail, but I'm in information services. Continuously improving your online presence is going to be paramount for your success.
So get your brand in order. There's always Sasha if you need help.
Yeah.
And get your brand in order and make sure that your online presence is solid. Yes. And without further ado, Lara.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us in this month's episode of All Things Global. And thank you so much, David Rosenberg. This was wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. And I want to thank everyone here, and big round of applause. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the live audience to represent these amazing global brands. And finally, a thank you to our sponsor, Vistatec. And a quick word about Vistatec. It's a multilingual services provider that works with some of the world's most iconic brands to make multilingual versions of their products. We're known for quality and technical innovation, and we're also known for our academic focus. One can say a nerdy focus. This All Things Global series aims to connect this global community with knowledge and ideas to support a successful global strategy. Please reach out to Suzanne or me or any of your friends at Vistatec to talk anytime on LinkedIn or anywhere. And join us for the next episode. It's going to be a total shift in topic. It'll be super interesting. We're super excited. Come find out about us. And thank you once more to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.